Welcome class to chapter 14. This is on your respiratory system. This is the last chapter in module 3. So after this chapter, you guys will have your other test. We'll look at structures of the respiratory system, mechanisms of breathing, and what the respiratory system is known for, and that's the transport of gases. We'll look at respiratory centers in the brain and then some disorders. So functions of your respiratory system. The biggest one, breathing in provides your body with essential oxygen needed to extract energy from food. So oxygen is important in turning glucose into energy, food into energy for your body. And also the second main function is exhaling carbon dioxide, which is a waste product of cellular respiration, and also to help regulate the acid-base balance of body fluids. Carbon dioxide controls the pH levels in the blood, so how much you breathe out and how quickly you breathe out will establish the pH level of your blood. There's 4 processes that play a part in respiration: the breathing, external respiration, gas transport, and internal respiration. So breathing moves air in and out of the lungs. External respiration is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the lungs and the blood, where oxygen will leave the air in the alveoli and get into the bloodstream. Gas transport then moves oxygen and carbon dioxide between the lungs and body tissues. And internal respiration is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and body tissues itself. Regions of the respiratory system, you have an upper and a lower region that we will go over. The upper respiratory system includes the nose and pharynx, and we can see the nasal cavity. The sinuses are spaces within your skull bones. The pharynx is passageway for food and air. The epiglottis covers the larynx during swallowing, and the larynx is the opening to your trachea or your windpipe. So it's important for your epiglottis to close off your larynx during swallowing so that food doesn't get down your windpipe or your trachea. If that happens, you'll feel like you're choking and you'll try to cough that food back up. Then we get to respiratory muscles, which help with breathing. The big one is your diaphragm, which sits right below the lungs. And then the lower respiratory system exchanges gases. That's the big function. We have your lungs, which are structures that contain alveoli. And alveoli, if we go down to the last one, are these microscopic chambers for gas exchange. They always should be inflated. They look like clusters of grapes. And capillaries will surround the alveoli for where that gas exchange will occur. Trachea branches into bronchi and then bronchioles. So kind of this upside down branching of a tree going on as the branches of the tree eventually end in these alveoli. The upper respiratory system's main functions are to filter warm and moisten the air and get it ready for the gas exchange down in the lower respiratory tract. So here's the movement of gases during inhalation, and you should know this order from your nose to the trachea, bronchus, bronchiole, alveolus, and then blood capillary. And then movement of gases during exhalation goes opposite. The nose structure, so we're part of the upper respiratory system. It has 2 sides of nasal cavities, and the nasal septum is the wall that divides it into 2. You have a mucous membrane covering the inner surface, and it helps to clean, warm, moisten, and provide for the sense of smell. So here's a look at your nose. Within the trachea and the larynx, you have cilia, which are little tiny hairs that help to trap and cleanse the airway of debris. Cigarette smoke actually completely destroys cilia in your airways. So that's why you get black lungs from smoking so quickly. There's really no line of defense to clean out that smoke that's passing through your trachea. Sinuses are large air-filled spaces in the bones of the face. They'll connect to your nasal cavities. They help to lighten the head, warm and moisten air, and part of the resonating chamber that affects voice. Sinusitis is an inflammation of the mucous membrane of your sinuses. So that's where you get a sinus infection. The pharynx is your throat. It's a passageway for food, drink, and air. It's connected to the ear via the auditory tubes to help equalize pressure. And the larynx is also known as your voice box, or your Adam's apple. It's a box-like structure made mostly of cartilage. It serves as a selective entrance to the lower respiratory system, has vocal cords that helps you create your voice. And here's a look at your larynx, and looking down through it, you can see the vocal cords opening and closing to help create sound. The larynx as a selective entrance to the lower respiratory system, that involves the epiglottis, which is a flap of cartilage that covers the larynx during swallowing so no food gets through, or the glottis, which is the opening in the larynx through which air passes. It also covers that. If this mechanism fails accidentally, coughing could expel that material, or you might have to use the Heimlich maneuver to dislodge material. This is a look at how to do the Heimlich maneuver. I would suggest you take a properly trained medical class for this and not just what you're seeing in this PowerPoint. But that's how you would dislodge an object from being in the larynx. You have vocal cords, which are two thick strands of tissue stretched over the glottis. When they're stretched and thin, that will allow for a higher pitch. Laryngitis, again, we see a lot of itis words. Whenever you see an itis word, that means inflammation of the whatever it's referring to. So this is inflammation of your larynx, where your vocal cords become swollen and thick, causing your voice to deepen. And the trachea is then your windpipe, which is your lower respiratory system. It's held open all the time by C-shaped rings of cartilage, which will help the airway from collapsing, which is good because we want airflow to become constant between the environment and your lungs. Then the bronchial tree is a network of progressively smaller air tubes. When your trachea divides, it first divides into bronchi, then bronchioles, and eventually terminate in alveoli, which are those little sacs for gas exchange. Bronchi are also held open by cartilage, but the amount of cartilage decreases as tubes get smaller. Bronchioles will completely lack cartilage altogether and only have smooth muscle in them, and they will be controlled by the nervous system to allow for constriction or dilation. So there's a look at your bronchial tree. Again, this is the trachea coming down your windpipe and how it branches into just smaller and smaller bronchioles. And again, you can refer to it as an upside down tree. Asthma are spasms of the bronchial muscles that severely restrict airflow. So it's characterized by difficulty breathing. It could be caused by allergies, respiratory infections, or even exercise. And inhalants, when people take an inhaler every day or only when they need to, they're prescribed to relax bronchial muscles or to reduce inflammation of those air tubules. Then the alveoli is the lower respiratory system. These are teeny tiny minute sacs where oxygen will diffuse from the inhaled air into the blood capillaries that surround each alveolar sac. Carbon dioxide will diffuse from those blood capillaries back into the alveolar space to be exhaled. Surfactant is a phospholipid molecule that coats your alveoli and keeps them open at all time. Respiratory distress syndrome occurs in some premature babies due to insufficient production of surfactant. And you can see that here. So here's your alveolar sacs and how they're completely surrounded by capillaries, which will pick up oxygen and dump off carbon dioxide. So here's a look at the review of structures of your respiratory system, their description and function. Mechanisms of breathing then, air moves between your atmosphere and the lungs in response to pressure gradients. So air will come into your lungs when pressure in the atmosphere is greater than the pressure in the lungs, and air moves out of the lungs when pressure in the lungs is greater than pressure in the atmosphere. So it kind of moves by concentration gradient, just down its concentration gradient from a high pressure to a low pressure. Inhalation is also called inspiration. Air will move into your lungs when your thoracic cavity increases in volume due to contraction of your diaphragm and intercostal muscles, which are between your ribs. And air will rush in because the pressure in the lungs is less than the pressure in the atmosphere. So air will rush into an area where there's less of it. This is an active process involving muscle contraction, but it also plays on the fact of these pressure differences. Exhalation just does the opposite. Air will move out of the lungs when everything is relaxed again and the thoracic cavity decreases in volume. So you'll notice when you breathe in, your lungs will get larger, and when you breathe out, exhalation, the thoracic cavity gets smaller, it decreases in volume because you're letting that air out. Air will move out of the lungs because pressure in the lungs is greater than pressure in the atmosphere. And this is typically just a passive process without muscle contraction because everything is relaxing back to normal. Some mechanisms of breathing, these are some measurements that we can take to measure someone's breathing. And you would do this in a lab in physiology if you want to take that eventually. Tidal volume is the volume of air inhaled or exhaled during normal breathing or during a normal breath. So this is just normal breathing as you go throughout the day, the volume of air. Inspiratory reserve volume is the volume of air that can be inhaled in addition to a normal breath. So when you take in a deep breath, you're working to get at that inspiratory reserve volume. Expiratory reserve volume is the volume of air that can be exhaled in addition to a normal breath. So when you really try to push out all the air in your lungs. Vital capacity is just the maximum volume of air that can be inhaled or exhaled in a single forced breath. And that would be adding all the three before from the previous slides. And then the residual volume is just the volume of air remaining in the lungs after maximum exhalation. So you always have a little bit of air in your lungs left over after you breathe out. Total lung capacity is combining the two from the previous slides together then. So this is total volume of air in the lungs after maximal inhalation. So that would be your vital capacity plus your residual volume. We usually graph these volumes on a graph. Tidal volume is just seen as normal breathing, inspiratory reserve volume, expiratory reserve volume, and then how we get total lung capacity, adding them all together, vital capacity, and then residual volume. This is important because you can measure these in a medical setting because it's important to know how much air you're getting in and out for people with some sort of lung disorder like emphysema or asthma. They want to make sure you're getting adequate oxygen intake. Transport of gases. There's three processes. External respiration occurs in your alveoli, and that's where oxygen diffuses into those blood capillaries and carbon dioxide diffuses into the alveoli for exhalation. Then there's gas transport by the blood, which will take oxygen to where it needs to go in your body, whether that's the tissues of a specific organ or cell. And then internal respiration involves what happens in tissues, where oxygen will then diffuse out of those blood capillaries and into cells, and carbon dioxide will diffuse out of the cells as a waste product back into the blood to be taken back to the lungs to be exhaled. So this is just a look at the pulmonary and systemic circulations found in the heart and how internal respiration shows oxygen diffusing into body cells, carbon dioxide diffusing into the blood. In external respiration, this is gas exchange in the lungs where oxygen from air is going into the capillary, carbon dioxide is then diffusing from the blood back into the air to be expelled. Most oxygen carried in the blood is bound to hemoglobin, a protein in red blood cells, and we call it oxyhemoglobin if it's bound to oxygen. Carbon dioxide is removed by the blood in one of three ways. It can be dissolved in your plasma or carried by hemoglobin as carb-aminohemoglobin. Most of carbon dioxide is transported as bicarbonate ion, and these bicarbonate ions are an important part of your body's acid-base buffering system. Your basic breathing is controlled by a breathing center located in the medulla of the brain, the midbrain or the brainstem. The pattern of breathing can be voluntarily altered through impulses originating in your cerebral cortex. So these are neural controls of breathing and chemicals controls of breathing. Carbon dioxide is the most important chemical influencing your breathing rate. You have chemoreceptors located in the medulla, aortic bodies, and carotid bodies. Increased carbon dioxide prompts increased breathing rate to try to get rid of excess carbon dioxide in your body, because an increased amount of carbon dioxide within your body cells will increase the pH. Oxygen does not influence breathing rate unless its blood levels fall dangerously low, and then you'll have chemoreceptors that'll help detect that. So take a look at this video when you have a chance. And this is a look at how increased blood levels of carbon dioxide will cause an increase in blood pH, and how that eventually will tell your body to breathe out excess carbon dioxide. So you might hyperventilate, and then when the breathing rate is increased and more carbon dioxide is inhaled, the carbon dioxide level in blood returns to normal. Respiratory disorders, the common cold is one that we've probably all had. It's caused by more than 200 different viruses, so that's why it's so easy to catch, because there's 200 different types of it. And the biggest thing, you'll get it when you touch something and then put your hand to some sort of mucous membrane, whether that's your nose, your mouth, your eyes. The influenza or flu is caused by 3 major types of viruses, A, B, or C. The symptoms are more severe than those of a cold. They can be complicated by secondary infections such as pneumonia, bronchitis, and sinusitis. So you should always get a flu shot, an influenza shot, but if you don't have an influenza shot and you have a pre-existing condition like pneumonia, bronchitis, and sinusitis, it could become deadly. Thousands of people die from the flu every year. Vaccines are 60 to 70% effective because new strains constantly appear. Pneumonia is an inflammation of the lungs where fluid accumulates in the alveoli, reducing gas exchange, so it makes breathing difficult. It's most commonly caused by a bacterial or viral infection. Strep throat is caused by Streptococcus bacteria. It's soreness accompanied by swollen glands and a fever. It could have serious consequences. It could cause rheumatic fever or lead to kidney disease. So if you think you have strep throat, you should really take some antibodies to get rid of it. Tuberculosis is an infection caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It's transmitted through respiratory droplets, and it results in fibrous tissue, tubercles in the lungs building up. This one can be fatal. There's multi-drug resistant strains on the rise. Cystic fibrosis is an inherited lung disorder where a single mutation results in thick mucus that can clog air passageways and lead to lung infections. There's no cure for cystic fibrosis unless you just get lung transplants over and over again, but it keeps coming back. It's a sad disease as well. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, COPD. This is a whole group of lung conditions that make breathing difficult. Tobacco is the most common cause of COPD in the United States, and bronchitis and emphysema are the 2 most common examples. Bronchitis is inflammation of the membrane of the bronchi. Inflammation results in the production of excess mucus, which triggers a deep cough. It can be acute, so short-lived, or chronic, long-lived. And then emphysema is caused by the destruction of alveoli, usually by smoking. It will result in the decreased surface area available for gas exchange. It'll cause shortness of breath. It can be treated but not ever cured, so another reason to never smoke. Here's a look at normal alveoli and emphysema, how they're starting to just decrease their size and not able to function. And their alveolar walls are specifically just breaking down. Lung cancer is about 85 to 90% are caused by smoking, so they're therefore preventable. Typical progression is chronic inflammation, then changes of cells, uncontrolled cell division forms a tumor, and then your cancer will spread to other parts of the body. This is a look at a smoker's lung, and I believe this is a cancerous kind of massed in white there. Okay, so here's your checklist of items that you should be able to know. Again, this is the end of Module 3, so get ready for another test, and thanks for listening.